Okay, Modonauts, it's time for render pass therapy. And this is going to be like a therapy session because some of you have undoubtedly been traumatized by render passes because it's kind of hard to tell what's going on, and it can also completely screw your scene up if you don't know what you're doing. The great thing about render passes in MODO is that they're extremely powerful and flexible. It's really one of the most underrated parts of the program in terms of MODO's power. The bad thing about render passes is if you don't know what you're doing, you're gonna blow your scene up pretty quick. And MODO doesn't have a sort of specific render pass UI. It has controls for passes are sort of scattered about in different windows, and you really have to keep tight control of what's going on and really be aware of what you're doing. Otherwise, you're gonna kind of mess your scene up, and I'm sure that's happened to a lot of people. The deal with render passes is I made a list. I didn't really make a list. I just wrote a couple things down. Well, the basics. So a pass in MODO can contain different values for any channel in the scene. So when you think of render passes, you think of different colors, different lighting situations, a couple of specific outputs, some things like that. You don't usually think of completely different animations or completely different camera moves or completely different subdivision surface settings and things like that in a render pass, but all of those things are channels, right? So a pass can contain different values for any channel. So if you look at a channel, let's just look at a channel here. Let's look at, grab an item, let's say, not a texture locator, that's an item. And these are all the channels on a texture locator, right? It's a lot of channels, and that's just a texture locator. Any of these values can be different in a separate pass. Same with geometry, same with lights, same with camera. You could have different depth of field settings per pass, different animations per pass, different light values and colors, of course, per pass, but different morphs per pass. I mean, any channel value can be different in a different pass. So that's very powerful. We're not just dealing with render related parameters here. We're dealing with the entire program. But also very dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, because you could accidentally change your camera in one pass and then you go and render everything. And why is my camera different in this pass? Well, it's because you altered your camera channels in that pass and added those to that pass. So let me back up a little bit and explain exactly what's going on from MODO's perspective. And to do that, I'm actually going to make a new scene and go over to the Setup tab and give myself a sphere. And actually looking at rigging is going to help us understand passes in a weird sort of way. So I'm going to grab middle mouse drag and grab some points there and just add a transform deformer. And what that did, if you didn't know this, is kind of cool, is MODO, if you have some points selected, MODO and do a transform locator deformer, it's going to take those points and give them 100% weight map value. It's going to create a new weight map for those, right? Transform weight. And it's going to, let me just throw this down here, and then the influence here. So we've got, of course, how rigging works is you've got a source of points, you have a control for it, an effector which will control the deformation, and you have an influence which basically decides what points from the source are going to be used. And this influence, of course, is just pointing to the weight map that MODO created for us. And if I look at my transform effector here, and I go over to the channel list, and I see over here it says source, and it says setup. And I think, okay, that's interesting. Setup, what's a source and why does it say setup? Because I'm not in setup mode. I'm in just scene mode here. If I go to setup mode, I've got this nice yellow line around here, which I'll get back to in a minute because that is important. But you'll see I have my channel values still say source setup. So if I change this, let's say I want this at 0 in setup, okay? So right now it says edit. Why does that say edit? Well, I'm editing this value, and so the channel source is in a state of flux because it's being altered. And this edit doesn't get committed until I change frames or apply them manually or pop out of setup mode. And there's a few other things that will automatically apply your changes. So if you watch down here, if I just change frames, now it says setup over here again, and that edit has been applied. Okay, I'm going to go back to frame 0 here. Now if I pop back out, it still says setup here, and you'll notice that this value is now 0. So setup mode, let me just go over here to Sketchbook Pro, which is an Autodesk product, but that's okay. So here I have an item. This little circle's an item. That's my transform effector, right? That's this guy right here, right? And this item has channels, and some of the channels it has are transform channels, X, Y, Z. And these channels have values. Now, where do these channels get their values? That's the whole point of source, right? Right now it's getting those values from the setup state of the scene. So a scene, your scene in MODO has separate, we'll call them states. We'll say there's setup, and then there's scene, okay? And there's going to be some more, as you'll see in a minute. So right now, these channel values, we'll put them right here, XYZ, in setup. This item is getting these channel values from setup, okay? Like that. Now we change it in setup mode, and it says setup, but we go back into scene mode, and it still says setup. And what happens is, unless these values are overridden in the scene mode, they just flow up like that. So these values in scene haven't been changed at the scene state, so it's just using the setup values. It's still using these setup values. But if I, for instance, go to the scene, here I'm in the scene state, not setup, here's setup, right? Here I'm in scene. If I activate my transform tool and move this, you'll see if so it goes to edit over here. This one, Z, is still in setup because I haven't moved it yet. Boom. Now they're all in edit. Now if I apply these by moving the time slider, or there's an apply and discard button down there at the bottom of the screen to the right of the transport controls, they would do the same thing as the ones in the render layout. Typically, you don't think of applying your changes. You just do them because you activate a new tool and it applies them, or you change frames and it applies them, or you start selecting other things and activating a tool again and it applies them. So it's doing this behind the scenes, but because I'm showing you this, I want to show you how this happens. So I'm just going to change frames, and that's going to apply it. Now it says scene, source scene. And it's different now, right? Let me go back to front. And if I go to setup mode, it's down here. And I go to scene, it's up there. So I have different values in setup and scene. So it's not getting, now I've changed these right here, right? These are changed. They're not the same ones as here. And now these channels on this item, on this transform effector, are now getting their values from this source, the scene source, not the setup source. So it's not getting those from there anymore. They still exist, right? Because if I go to setup mode, now it's getting the values from setup, right? In setup mode. Bing, 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 bing. That's a dashed line if you don't know. So that's interesting. So basically, an item's channels can have different sources for values. We can have setup source, or we can have a scene source. And this is very important for something like deformation or rigging or dynamics in a lot of cases, because the differences between setup values and scene values affect how the scene is going, what MODO is going to do with the scene. In this case, the difference between the delta between scene values and setup values determines the deformation of these points. So there's a change between these values and these values, a delta, which is, I think, a triangle, right? Triangle, delta. Is that right? I think it is. Delta, delta, delta. Can I help you, help you, help you? All right, so that's the change there. And, of course, with weights, points, you can weigh them as well, this is sort of getting a little off topic. But when you weigh a point, right, I'm just dragging the weights down with the weight tool, Shift W. That's just modulating that delta by the weight of these points. So that's how deformation works in MODO. So if you didn't know that, now you know that in a render pass video, no less. So that's pretty cool. So what does this have to do with render passes, you may be asking? And render passes actually isn't really the best term. We'll just call them passes because they're not just about render values. As you see, any channel value can be different per pass. So what is a pass? Well, a pass, we have this sort of stack of scene states, right? Setup, scene. A pass is just an alternate scene state. So on top of scene, we can have a pass. We'll call this pass. I'm going to call this pass chicken because it's funny. Then we can have another pass. We'll call that, you know what, I'm not going to call that chicken. Here's what I did when I was thinking how clever I'd be when I made this. We have a pass group. So we have a group of passes, right? We'll call that group chicken. And we'll call this pass thigh because that's a good part of the chicken. And we'll call this one drumstick. And so each of these scene states can hold alternate values for channels. They can become a source of values for these channels. So that's what happens when you go to a pass. If I were to go to the thigh pass, the thigh would be providing new values, maybe a new color for these channels. Okay, it becomes a new source. So that's how passes work in MODO. So let's make one real quick. I'm starting slow because you have to get this concept down to really understand what you're doing with passes. So, okay, so we've got our pass group here. So so we have a group tab here, we have a channel tab here, but I also want to see shading and I want to see properties. So I'm going to make a new window, actually a palette. And this is what I'm talking about when I say MODO's UI doesn't really support passes very well. Everything you need to do with passes are in MODO's UI, no doubt, just the standard sort of generalized UI. But I do think it would benefit from some specialized pass controls. Anyway, so I'm going to control slice on the thing to the thumb. They call that little circle the thumb. To split it, I'm going to make this a group, which is what? Utility, maybe? Groups. And this one I'm going to say, I expanded it. I'm going to say data list channels. Okay, so I've got groups and channels here, right? And I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say new pass group. I'm going to say you can't create a pass without it being in a pass group. Passes have to be in pass groups. So I'm going to create a new pass group, new. I call that chicken. See, chicken. It's already typed in there because I just practiced this to make sure it worked. So chicken. We have a pass group called chicken, right? There it is in my group folder here. And look, there's no passes in there. No passes. There's no passes. So I need to make a pass within the chicken pass group. And I say new, and we'll call that says drumstick. I'm going to start with thigh though. Now we have a pass called thigh in the chicken pass group. So we made a group, okay, pass group, and we added a pass called thigh. Thigh is a alternate scene state that can be a source of channel values. That's what it is. That's what a pass is, an alternate scene state that can act as a source for channel values. Okay, so here's thigh, and we're going to run into some issues here that I'm going to explain. This is the type of issues people run into when they first try passes. So I'm just going to click here in preview and select that purple torus material. And there it is, selected right there. Got it over here in the channel list here. I don't really need the geometry, so I'm going to deselect that. And I don't need this selected. Whoops, I don't need that thigh pass selected. I just need this guy selected. Now see, I'm doing everything again. Okay, so I'm in the thigh pass. I can tell I'm in the thigh pass by looking up here, it says thigh, and looking down here, it says chicken : thigh, which means I'm in chicken pass group in the thigh pass for the chicken pass group. If I go over here, let's go to setup again. Now you'll know what I'm talking about. This setup yellow bar, this is great because I know I'm in setup mode. It's hard to miss this yellow bar. And so I know when I have this yellow bar on and I start changing channel values, I'm changing those in the setup state. Passes, it's a little bit trickier. We don't have the yellow bar. So let's go back to setup and turn off setup mode. I don't have a yellow bar. All I have is this tiny little viewport, like heads up display here, and up here in the corner, if I happen to be in the render layout. So if I go over here to animate, and I start animating things, and I don't realize I'm in the thigh pass, and I'm making all these changes to my scene, you can see how this starts to get goofy really quick. So in previous versions of MODO, auto add was on by default. I'm going to explain what auto add is in a second. But first, I'm going to show you what happens when you try to make a change to a pass. So I've got my material selected, and I'm in chicken thigh pass, the chicken pass group, and I'm going to change this color. I'm going to change it to blue, and it changed it to blue. And if I think to myself, great, I just changed the color of my sphere, my torus in a pass. So I'm going to have a purple torus in my scene pass and a blue torus in my thigh pass. So I go back to my scene. I don't want to call it scene pass. We'll call it the base scene. And I'm back here in scene now. Not in a pass. Up here and down here. And I think to myself, wait a minute. Why is this blue? I thought it was going to stay purple. And I just make a change in a pass. And that change is just for that pass. Why is it changing my base scene? And the problem is, with auto add off, you have to add channels to the pass group for them to hold values for these alternate scene states. Okay? So what that means is, let me just do this again. When we go back up to chicken or thigh pass, turn on auto add. Okay, auto add is on. Notice there's no channels down here, but I do have a pass. So that pass is active. If I change this color to lighter blue, and right now, if you look over here, diffuse RGB, source is in edit. Remember edit? So these changes have not been committed to the thigh pass yet. Now I can commit those by changing the frame down here to a different frame, or I can go here and say none and get out of my passes back to the base scene. That'll commit it, or this nice apply button right here, which is what you should be in the habit of doing. If I hit apply, that has committed these values to the thigh pass. Now it says diffuse RGB source thigh. So right now, these diffuse RGB colors, and this was my transform effector in the previous scene, but we'll call this the material, the purple torus material. It's getting values from the scene, and those values are purple color. But in thigh, it's getting some alternate values. The thigh source is giving those channels values too, and it's giving it a light blue value. So these channels are receiving values from multiple sources now. And if I come back here and I look in my groups, you'll see a little plus by channels now. And look, diffuse RGB has been added to the scene. Now I had that because auto add was on, and that's very convenient. However, it's also very dangerous because when I'm in a pass, and I'm in the thigh pass right now, if I say, you know what, I need to get a better look at this this torus right here, I can't quite tell if I like that color or not, or the shadow's not making sense, and I push my camera in and think, okay, that looks pretty good. Let me go back to the scene now. And wait, my camera just jumped. Why did that happen? I'm in thigh, I'm real close. I'm in scene, and I'm back where I was. Look over here in my channels group. Position XYZ for the camera position. Because auto add was on, any change to any channel, any item's channel I make in MODO is going to be added to that pass. So if I just move the camera in because I want to check something out, and I'm not thinking, I'm not realizing I'm in a pass, then I just messed my scene up, right? So that's not good. So let me get out of that by hitting undo. Okay, so I took those channels out of there. Actually, let me show you a couple of other things before I do that. So if I go back to the scene, now why is that not purple? Oh, I have to change it back to purple because I initially changed it. So, okay, so let me back up a little bit. So when I initially made this blue without adding the channels, it changed because even though I was in the thigh pass, like this, so I'm in the thigh pass. Let's do this again, just so everybody is on board here. So I'm going to right click and remove these channels from the group. So those are removed. And if I'm in base scene, I'm blue. And if I'm in thigh scene, I'm blue. We'll say I want to change these channel values here of this material. And I'm in my thigh, but I have not added them here, right? And I have auto add off. And so if I change these, I'm making a change, and I think I'm making this change to the thigh pass because I'm in the thigh pass, and right here on the RGB it says, you know, we're in edit, so let's apply and commit those. I'm like, oh great, I just changed the thigh pass, but I jump back to my base scene, and what I'm doing is, see here where it says setup, I'm just changing my base scene. Also, the reason this says setup instead of source is because with most channel value, not most channel values, with a variety of channels, when you're changing their mode, even when you're in scene state, it's just changing the setup value, even though you're not in the setup state. And now I'm guessing that's just a decision that developers made when they are dealing with channels that aren't relevant to rigging or deformation or dynamics. And so when you make value changes in this in the scene state, it basically is just changing the setup state. Just to make things easier, so when I go to setup, it doesn't go back to default values. So when I go back, this started, of course, as gray, right, like all materials do. But if I go to setup, they don't turn gray. So it's changing those setup values. It's changing those values in the setup state, which then flow up to the scene state, which is where I'm at right now, which is fine. The point is, even though I was in the thigh pass, because I hadn't added channels over here and I didn't have auto add on, the changes that I was making, even though I was in the thigh pass, was happening at the setup state. So I'm going to turn these back to purple because purple is the best for a torus. Taurus's favorite color is purple. I'm going to go back up here to thigh. I know this is annoying and boring, but this is important. And now I need to add these channels to this group for these alternate values in the thigh, for the thigh to be an alternate source of values, right? So I can do that a couple ways. I can right click here and I can say add to current pass group. I can do that, which is a great way of doing it. Or I can even just drag and drop these over here like this. And now these channels are part of the chicken render pass group. So for any channel to hold an alternate state or to use a different source, so to speak, so these passes right here, right, thigh, that's a different source for channels. If I have 3 or 4 passes here, they're all different sources for channels. If I add another one, we'll call it drumstick. So that's another pass, right? That's another possible source of channel values. But the channels, to accept these as sources, have to be part of this pass group. And you can do it automatically with auto add-on, but you can very easily screw your scene up. So I'm saying you do this, and so in 801, this was defaulted to off, which I think is a good thing, because you have to explicitly drag the channels you want, or right-click and apply, add the channels you want to be affected by these other sources into the pass group. So now I'm here. So if I'm in, let's go to make sure I'm in thigh, and now when I make a change to the Taurus, and make it the blue color I originally wanted, and hit apply, diffuse color, source thigh, it's blue, go back to none, diffuse color, source setup, purple. Great, right? Now let's say I want to go to the drumstick group. I click drumstick, and I think, okay, I'm in the drumstick group, and I start changing channel values here, changing colors. The problem is I'm not actually in the drumstick group. This is another bit of a gotcha. Just because I have this selected over here, by the way, doesn't mean I'm in that group. I have to have it up here. Right? I got to go up here to say drumstick. I can't, now you see a little eyeball here? That means that's the currently selected pass. So I can't actually click an eyeball here. Now I'm in the thigh pass, right? Because that turned blue. And I can change passes like that. But again, this is an easy way to screw up, because I can be in the thigh pass and I see this open. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll just go to drumstick pass. And I start changing things like this material value here. And I think, okay, drumstick, I want it to be green. And it looks like I'm in drumstick down here, but I'm not in drumstick, I'm in thigh, right? I'm in thigh. So don't do that. I want that blue. In order to get to drumstick, make it a habit to go up here and go to drumstick. And now drumstick is purple because it's getting these setup values, right? Setup to scene to drumstick. Haven't overridden them yet. It's not really overriding. Think of it as an alternate source. Okay, that's the way to do it. If the source is active, it's providing values to those channels. So the source is active, drumstick, and we want drumstick to be yellow, maybe. How about orangey? And then hit apply, because right now those colors are in edit. So hit apply. Now they're applied to drumstick. So if I go to drumstick, we go to thigh, and we go to scene. So now we're looking pretty good. We've got separate values for these 3 channels, 3 separate sources of values. We've got the scene, which is really getting them from setup, and we've got drumstick source and thigh source. And that's how passes work. Now, again, you got to be careful, because if I go back to drumstick and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that orange is great, but it'll look better if it's reflective. And I start going over here and I say, okay, match specular's on, so I'm going to say, 15 and 100, and that looks cool. Okay, great. I just hit apply, and now I just added that to my drumstick pass, right? No, wrong. I didn't, because if you look, I don't have the specular amount or Fresnel amount added to this pass group. So only channels that are in this pass group can hold values for these scene sources right here, these pass groups, these passes in the pass group, or which are sources for the channel values. These channels, spec Fresnel, have to be part of these right here. Otherwise, I'm just changing in scene and setup mode. So if I jump out of here back to scene mode, I still have my reflectivity, because even though I was in thigh pass, I didn't add the channels here. So any changes I made were happening down here in setup, okay, or scene. So here's an interesting thing. Now I made those changes to scene. So when I was in drumstick pass, I made some changes, even and those channels weren't selected, so it made those changes in scene, which is interesting. Because I don't know if this is a bug or if this MODO is supposed to work this way. It doesn't make any functional difference, really. If I go to setup and take a look, at these values. If I go to setup mode, spec amount is set up as 10. So I guess that's interesting. So I'm going on a little bit of a tangent here, but oh yeah, spec is 10, 15. That's interesting. I wonder why I adjust something. Maybe, I don't know. So that's a bit of a tangent. So don't get hung up on what I just was poking around there. The main point of this is don't start. Make sure you, if you're in a pass, make sure you have those channels added to the pass group if you're going to be making changes. So I'm gonna base scene here. I'm not in a pass. I'm gonna change this back 0 and 0. Go back up to thigh, or what was it? Drumstick, I guess. And then I need to add spec amount and Fresnel. I'm going to right click this time and say add to current pass group. Boom, there they are. And now when I change these fellas, just said fellas. There we go. And I apply that. We have drumstick source for these guys now. So now that worked. If I go to thigh, no reflectivity because I didn't make any changes there. And if I go to the base scene, no reflectivity. However, let's go back to drumstick here. I have reflectivity here. Now, I'm just going to escape to deselect things. If you look here, I've got a pass group, and I have two passes in the group, thigh and drumstick. These are alternate sources, sort of alternate scene states for channel values. And here I have all the channels that can accept values from these two alternate states. However, it doesn't distinguish between these channels here. It's just a big list of channels. If I look at spec Fresnel, it doesn't tell me if it's getting alternate values from thigh or drumstick or both. I just have to know because I'm the person who made this, if this is getting different values from which of these scenes. So diffuse RGB, we know we have different values in both of these guys. But spec and Fresnel, I don't really know if I'm getting values from both or one or the other. So that's another part of MODO where it would be helpful to me to know if this channel here is getting alternate values from this guy or both. So there's some interface improvements we can have here. Also, I can't select these guys and see what channels are going on over here. I have to have the item selected. So I have to hunt down material 2 right here. And then I can look and say, okay, spec has drumstick values. And so we've got thigh has, I'm in drumstick group here. And if I go to thigh group, spec Fresnel and spec amount don't have anything, just have scene values, right? And just RGB are getting thigh values, even though all of these guys are in the list. And if I go to drumstick, now I can see, oh, okay, during the drumstick pass, I do have alternate values from the drumstick source for these channels. So again, it's a little complicated, and the interface doesn't really help us decide, know which of these channels are getting values from either one or both of these guys. One way you can get around that is only ever have one pass per pass group. So any channels in that pass group would just be getting values from the alternate source, the single alternate source in that pass group. But who wants to do that, right? I mean, you could do that, but it's, again, I'm just sort of harping on the UI here, but these are gotchas. So let's do a couple more things. I just want to show a couple more gotchas before I move on to an actual workflow that's going to work for everybody. Let's do the thigh pass and say, okay, I want better lighting. So I've got my key light here, and I want to change the intensity. So I can go to radiance, and I can right click, and I could say add to current pass group, and there I've got the intensity. So again, I am in thigh, right? Thigh pass, little eyeball there, thigh pass. And so if I change this intensity, which is in the pass group, then it's going to just change it for this pass, right? So say 26. Okay, great. So I pumped it up quite a bit. And now it's in edit mode, right? Because I haven't applied it yet. I haven't changed frames. I haven't hit apply. This is a little gotcha. If I jump out of here and say none, it's going to apply it. And that will be applied to this this value, 26.0 watts, will be applied to this thigh pass. So if I hit none, and I go back to this group, that's 3. And if I go back to thigh, it's 26. Great. So what happens if I say, okay, I also want this light's color. So we'll just go to the light's color here and add these RGB values. Right click, add to pass group. There they are. And I say, okay, I'm in the thigh group and I've changed the intensity. I also want to make this a cool light, change the color to more of a blue, get some cool light in there. And I think, great. And I don't hit apply, but I think, okay, well, if I jump out of the passes, it applies it. So what if I just jump out of the pass group? So if I go to the pass group and type none, it's still blue. Jumping out of the pass group does not apply those. Still in edit mode, right? It did not ever apply those. So I would have to go back to the actual pass and make those changes. So here I am with my light material. Now it's blue, but it's getting that from setup. So I just made a mistake. And that's why you have to be careful, because I just changed these. I just changed my base scene because I didn't hit apply and then leave. I didn't hit apply, or I didn't leave through the passes here. I left through the pass group. So don't do that. Don't leave your passes by just jumping out of the pass group, because it's going to apply those changes you made in that pass to your base scene or the setup mode. So there's that. I'm just going to do that little bit of thing there. So here I am. I'm going to hit apply, and whoops, I want to set up. I'm in thigh mode. I'm in edit. And if I hit apply, now those are applied to thigh. And since they're applied, I can jump out. And now we're back to white for that color. And if I go to thigh, we are back to, grab my guy here, we're back to blue. Okay, another thing. Now let's say I really like this blue color. In fact, this blue color is so awesome, I want to push that back down to my base scene. I can do that. I can right click and say, move action pass value to scene. So what that's going to do is it's going to remove these values from the thigh pass and push it down to the base scene. So move it down. Now the thigh pass is actually getting these blue values from the scene, and when I jump down into the scene, my light's still blue. Or not still blue, it is now blue instead of white. So I just pushed those down. I just made some changes up here in thigh. This is my light item. These are my light RGBs, which I made blue. And I thought to myself, you know what? I want this pushed to the scene, so I did that move value to scene. I moved it down here. Now it's in the scene, and it's no longer in thigh. So I can actually go into thigh and say I could maybe change this to, make it warm like that, and hit apply. And now I have warm for thigh and cool blue for scene. So that function, moving from a pass to a scene, is useful if I am in a pass and I forget that I'm in a pass and I start changing things. And I thought, well, I think I'm making changes to my base scene, and I'm not. I'm making a bunch of changes to my pass. And I think, crap, I just spent 20 minutes making changes to my pass, and I have to undo all that stuff or start over or whatever. You can actually grab all those channels and push those values down to the base scene. So you can sort of fix your screw-ups if you do that. So that was very tedious, but it's important to understand how passes work, and that you have, there's a lot of gotchas in the workflow, and you have essentially a pass is just an alternate scene state that can be a source for channel values. And those channels have to be members of that pass group. Okay, so very tedious, very boring, but now you got it. So let's look at an actual workflow that we're going to be doing. So I'm going to just delete this entire thing. Right click, delete. Okay, so we have no more passes or pass groups in there. I don't need to have that selected. I'm going to keep this open because this is very useful for us. So let me just move it down for a minute. Right now, let me just adjust the scene really quickly. Go to perspective mode here. We've got an area light right here. I'm going to Control D in item mode to duplicate it. A little trick is if you hit Alt W, now I'm in World Action Center, right? Action Center Origin, or World, W for World, but Origin, whatever you want to call it. And if I hit Rotate, I'm rotating from the center of the scene there, so I can actually place this light on the other side kind of nicely. Make it a little bigger maybe. We'll just call this Fill. Why not? Okay, so I changed the scene a little bit. hit escape, double tap escape to get out of that. I do have a couple of different HDRs in here as well, which I'll get to in a minute. And I'm going to create a new pass group. So new, and we'll call this color and lighting options. Okay. So I already had typed that in there. So there it is, color and lighting options. And that's our new pass group. And we come up here. There's our pass group. No passes yet. Now I can, of course, add a new pass here. I can also click add new pass here if I want to. Add new pass. We'll call this material. And we'll call this material A options, and hit OK. And we'll add another one and call it material B options, and hit OK. And we'll do one more. Well, that's fine. And so, okay, so right now material B options is selected. All right. I'm just gonna come up here and use the dot. Actually, don't do that. Just get in the habit of changing it up here. Let's go to material A options. So I'm in material A options, pass, right? Boom, boom, boom. And I want to make some changes, but this time I don't want to make just subtle changes like changing the color of a torus. I want to make a ton of changes. I want to make a ton of changes. I want to completely change that torus material. I want to completely change the lighting. I want to completely change a number of things. And if I do that, it's going to be really tedious to add every single channel here under channels. But I want to, I may change like 16 channels just in the material alone of the torus, another 10 channels in this cone over here, another 10 over here for the floor to get really different materials, right? That's really tedious. There's got to be a better way to do this, and there is a better way to do this. So what we're going to do is over here in cone, let's make this easy on us. I'm going to press F6, bring up some asset window here, and under assets, in fact, I'm going to pop back out of my material group. I'm in the base scene. And under materials, I've got a bunch of different, let's go to painted because there's some kind of cool materials in here. And here I've got some cool car materials, right? And so let's say I want to use these. So I'm going to drag Inferno Orange over here to the cone and just drop it right there. Cone goes orange. I'm going to drag Metallic Warm Gray. Actually, I made this one. I made all the original MODO materials, by the way, like way back in 301 or something. They're super outdated though, so but I'll just go ahead and use that for torus. But there's some new ones here. I think Seth may have made these. So Seth, who's active on the forums a lot, I think he made these, and they're way better than the old ones I made. So we'll do crystal red metallic. No, let's do dark blue matte for the floor, the plane. Okay, so I've got a bunch of different materials in here now. And I'm in the base scene, right? But I'm going to turn these off. Okay, boom, boom, and boom. In fact, I'm going to duplicate materials for my key light. Duplicate. And fill. We'll say duplicate. And I'm actually just going to Control G and group these as well. I'm going to name these groups. I'm going to name this Option A, or we can call it, what's the name of our pass up here? Material A options. So we're going to call this Material A options. And I'm actually going to duplicate this thing. Kind of see where I'm going here, don't you? Call this Material B options. Material B options. Okay. I'm going to turn these off. All right. So those are off. Those groups are off. Up here on the key as well. Material A options. And duplicate. Material B options. All right. Very good. And then up here, instead of calling that Inferno Orange Metallic, in fact, I'll just group that right there. We just turn that one on, but this one off. We'll call this again Material A Options. And up here, and then we'll just get a different material in there for Material B. Let's say, I'll just stick to let's do a different thingy here, maybe Enhanced MODO. What do we have in here? Some fabric. Let's do something with a texture map. Maybe a floor. Okay, here. This is good. Maybe. No. Wasting time. Everybody's losing interest. No. All right. Maybe not any of those. Maybe I'll just stick with This will get my point across. We'll just stick with these materials here. Let's just do some glacier white there, and maybe some deep sea blue for the torus, and maybe nice black floor. Okay, and again, I'm going to group these guys just real quickly. Group, Control G, Control G, Control G, Control G. I'm going to name these Material B options, and because I'm a very clever person, even though it only took me 20 of these to figure this out, I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste. Boom. Material B options. Material B options. And then, of course, Material A options. Let me just copy this, except for the for part. Whoops, where am I at? Material A options. Let me select that and copy it. The best part of the tutorial is watching people type in names. So there we go. But you see where I'm going with this. I'm loading up. Oh, B. Are you kidding me? I didn't copy that. A. Material A options. So I'm loading up my base scene with all of my options. Because this workflow is going to make it easier for me. And I'm going to turn all these guys off in the base scene. So those guys are off, these are off, these are off. So my base scene looks like my base scene, right? My light options are off. I could do this over here as well. Let's turn off studio lighting, turn that off. This is just the scene lighting, which is black, which looks terrible. So let's go to something else maybe. Pump that up a little bit. Okay, so there's my base scene, right? This is my base scene. And studio lighting, we'll also call this Material A options. Can I group down here? I'm not sure if I can. I can actually, yeah. So again, rename, Material A options, and group the kitchen, HDR, Material B options. Okay. All right, so we have a pass group, color, and lighting options, and we have a pass, Material A options, Material B options. So if I'm in my base scene here, I'm gonna get rid of this guy. Now you can see we've got, this is so annoying that it adds all these groups. This is from adding some of Seth's presets have schematics attached to them, which is fine. So these are in the groups here. So if I go to the schematic here, you'll see all these different groups from the car paint materials. There's also these material groups that are added as well. So I can't delete. I don't want to delete these actually, but so just ignore these in here. It sort of clutters up my scene a little bit, but let's just ignore those for now. We'll focus on channels here. So what I did is I added a whole bunch of different material options, A and B, also some lighting HDR options, and also some light material options. And these are a ton of channels, right? There's a ton of channels in all of these options. You know, every single paint material has a lot of channels in there. And I don't want to have to manually add all of these channels into this group here and into this pass group, because that's keeping track of a lot of things. I just want to keep track of a few things. So I'm organizing my scene in this particular workflow to make passes easier for me. So I'm actually going to go to Material A, all my Material A options. And I believe I can do this. We'll see if this works. Material A. So I got my Material A options here using my filter here. I'm just going to right click and make these red. Okay, let's change this to B. Let me just hit escape to deselect everything, change that to B. Now I've got Material B options. Okay, lighting, environment. I'm going to make these blue. Excellent. Can I change these with colors? I cannot. It would be great to be able to have corresponding colors over here. Let me get out of filter mode. To these colors here, but I'm just trying to organize my scene, right? So I'm going to know what channels in the shader tree are in what pass. Okay, this is going to be really easy for me. So what I also need to do, oops, let's turn off the visibility settings here, those two guys. So this is my base scene. Just the base values are visible. None of these material A or B, let me just deselect, none of these material A or B options are visible. This visibility channel is off. That's just one channel. I don't have to deal with all the different channels of metallic warm gray paint overriding these. I just have to deal with one channel, this visibility channel. So this is great for me. So I go to my pass, and I go to material A options. Now this is a nice thing where auto add is actually kind of nice, and where I actually like auto add with this workflow, because I can go here and I can turn on auto add, and I could just start turning on material A options eyeballs. And it will be automatically added to those channels. The visibility channel for that eyeball will automatically be added to this pass. So the only issue with that is you have to know if auto add is on or not, right? You need to know if auto add is on, because you don't want to start moving your camera and screwing up your scene. So for right now, let me just turn this off. I want to do a couple other things real quick. I've got some, let's go to 3D view here. We have some outputs, right? Right now I just have color and alpha, but let's say I want to do some additional outputs. So we go up here to render. Let's say add render output. Let's say basic, and we'll say final color. And we'll do another one, render outputs, basic alpha, and we'll do, let's say, how about a depth, render outputs, basic depth, and let's say we want also maybe something weird like, oh, let's say, let's do this under material A options. I'm going to add, for the torus, I'm going to add an alpha output. Actually, let's go back to my masking tutorial. I'm going to add a group. In this group, I'm going to point it to an item. I'm going to point it to the torus. So this group is pointing to the torus. I'm going to add a alpha output to the torus, right? So I'm going to rename this torus alpha output. And so I've got that up here, right there. Okay. So I've got some things going on here. I've got, let me just organize this real quick. Let's do final color, output depth, and I'm going to group that. And I'm going to call this material A options. Okay. We'll make this red as well, of course. And so we've got some output options. And again, these are going to be off. I'm not sure off the top of my head if the eyeball for outputs in a group is going to turn those off. So I'm just going to turn them all off just to make sure. But in the base scene, those are off. And we'll just add one more set of outputs here. We'll just call it render outputs, final color, and whoops, not in that group. And another one we'll call render outputs. That was the alpha. So we've got a couple more here, and I'm going to group these. You know what I'm going to do. Material B options, right? Okay, and make this blue, of course. Okay, so I've got material A options, so I've got, let me turn these off. So normally I would also name my outputs. So again, it's final color output. We'll just say that's A and alpha A for that pass. So you can never go wrong by organizing your scene too much, right? I want to know what these passes are. I know it's tedious, but that's going to help me. So I've got four things going on here, just from the shader tree, bottom up. I've got environments, I've got whites and materials, white materials, I've got materials, and I've got outputs, okay? And I have all of my options for my passes all set up here in the base scene. But in the base scene, I have them all off, okay? So these two guys are off as well. So we're just using this right here. I just want to make sure, let me just turn these on, make sure these eyeballs are on, because I just want to turn off, deal with as few channels as possible. So basically the group is off, but inside the group is on. So if I were to turn on material A options, that's on. If I were to turn this on, I'm getting that material A there. So it's just one channel I'm dealing with, not tons of channels. Let's change our lights just real quick here. For the key light, material B, we're going to make this a cool color. It already is. Let's make it, actually, let's go to our scene here and make this more white. In fact, just hold down Shift and drag to the left. That's white. And the fill, let's hold Shift to make it white. Okay. Material A, we're going to make this more of a warm, like so. And material B, we're going to make this more of a cool. It already is kind of cool, but let's make it like up here. And then that's the fill light for the key light. Material A, we're just going to stick with our warm, maybe down here. And material B, we're going to say cool still, but maybe here. So I've got different light materials, okay, and I've got different materials, and I have different environments here, and I have, close these, there we go, and I have different outputs going on. And again, the outputs, I should have tested this before making this. I'm not sure if the output group being visible or not affects the entire set of outputs in the group, so I just turned everything off just to make sure. Okay, so here's my base scene, really bland. But what I'm going to do is, so right now, so this, again, this is a gotcha, right? So I've been doing all of this stuff right now, but I've been doing it inside Material A Options Pass because I moved to that earlier and I forgot to move back out. So this is a classic example of made a bunch of changes to my scene, but I've been doing it in this pass right now. So what I want to do is I'm going to use one of the gotchas to get back to my base scene without changing anything, without committing these to this pass. So also I don't have auto add-on and I don't have any channels here, so I'm actually okay with what I'm doing because any changes I made, remember, these channels have to be added to this pass group. So I'm okay. All these changes, even though I'm in this pass, they're just being made to the scene. So if I go back to the scene here, nothing has changed. So that's good. But again, that's just a gotcha. Like if I had a bunch of channels added to my pass group and I had been making all these changes just up here, turning these on and off, I would have been doing that to not my base scene, but that pass. So again, always know what pass you're in. That's why I really want a yellow setup type frame around me when I'm in a pass, because it's just so subtle. Just like just now, I just continued on with this tutorial and I was doing all these changes and I was in a pass. So fortunately I hadn't added channels here. I didn't have auto add on, but if I did, I would have just wasted a bunch of time. So there's that. So but anyway, now I'm in my base scene and this is my base scene. Great. So I'm going to go up to Material Options A. And like I said, I like to have auto add on as long as you're very careful, because I don't want to have to manually add all these visibility channels, these eyeball channels to the scene. Or rather, not the scene, but the color and lighting options render pass group, right? So there's no channels in there right now. I don't want to manually add all these guys in. So the reason I did these folders, of course, is because I don't want to manually add hundreds of channels for material changes, but I don't even really want to add like 20 enable eyeball channels either. That's because I feel comfortable with myself hitting auto add and doing this. If you don't, then you should go through and add all these enable channels right here, the enable channel to this pass group manually if you don't want auto add on. But I feel pretty good about myself. I'm going to turn auto add on. Before I do that, let me just go back to my base scene here. These are the base outputs on and off. So I'm actually going to group those and call them base scene outputs. And we'll call that, we'll just make that light blue, just make it a little different. Or how about light green? Just so I can remind myself of some things. So here's my base scene. If I render, that's my base scene, right? No other passes, no other outputs are even active. So I'm not getting anything else, and none of these other material, lighting, or environment options are active. So that's my base scene render. Okay, so go up here to Material Options A, and now I'm there. I'm going to press Auto Add. Got that on. Look out. Don't change the camera, anything like that. And I can even just, well, let's just do this way first. I'm going to go through, I'm going to start turning these eyeballs on. So I just changed the lighting with turning on the studio lighting HDR. I'm going to change my light colors to sort of a warm color that I had in this group right here, this sort of warm color, right? And I'm turning those on. And then I'm going to go over here and turn on some material options, just like that. Okay, looks kind of ugly, but that's not the point. And I'm going to turn on my output options. One thing I didn't do, and what you would want to do, of course, is have specific output paths here. So I actually like having output options like this. When I render my passes, I want to determine the name of these passes and where they go. So I could do that. I haven't done that, but I would go through and I would point all these to directories, okay? So I've done all that. I've auto add on, and so I'm going to bounce back to my main scene here, and then we're going to take a look. Look, no channels have been added there, but I've auto add on. I made channel changes, and I'm in this pass, and I'm going to pop back out, and it's going to apply all of those. And look, all these enable channels have now been added to this pass group, and here I am, base scene, right? Nothing's on, everything's off. Go up to material options A, and all these guys are on. So by putting all the changes you want into the base scene and putting them in folders and naming the folders and coloring the folders and turning them off, you know exactly what's in your scene and what's changing. I'm not having a bunch of thousands of channels in here for all my different individual channels in the scene I want to change and then randomly changing those in different passes, because that's really hard to keep track of. This is very easy to keep track of. This is a good workflow, in my opinion. This is the workflow you should be using. Okay, so that's pass A. Let's go to pass B. So I'm in material options B. Again, remember, everything's just floating. I haven't made any overrides here, so everything's just flowing up from the scene and set up states. This time I'm going to use the filter button here and call this material B. So I'm filtering on material B. And so you can imagine if you have a giant scene and you have like 300 of these, emails from clients can go screw themselves because I'm making videos for MODO community, and I'll have to get back to that. All right, so we've got material options B here, right? And I just filtered it out, which is very easy to do if you have named everything. I'm just going to do all this at once, right? I've auto add on. I'm going to select these guys, just like so. And I'm going to hit enable all at once. And there we go. And I'm going to, I can apply it like that. And I've added all of these guys to my channels. So great. One thing is, I just wasn't quite sure. I'll have to test this, but I'm going to turn these outputs on manually like that, because I can't remember if the group is visible, if it makes the outputs visible, or if the outputs have to be individually on, even if the group is on. So not sure, so we'll just do that. So let's make sure that's on. Also, I want to have my base scene outputs off. I don't need to re-output my base scene. Okay, those are going to be off during this pass. Okay, so we've got those. I'm just going to apply everything. And then I'm going to jump back to options, material options A. I think I forgot to turn these off, so let's turn these guys off. Okay, I can apply that. So what is with my torus there? So this may be, right, so I turned off that output, right? And so let's do torus final color A. Actually, let me jump back to shading. Edit. So why is my torus black? Let's take a look here. I'm guessing that is just a preview error. So I'm going to press F9, see what happens. This is going to be rendering this pass, and sure enough, there's my silver torus. So I'm just going to abort this. So this is the pass, output final color A. That's the not the pass, that's the output I'm looking at. So that's good. So let me abort that. Get out of there. So again, preview options can preview bugs, and this looks like a preview bug, so can also throw you off. Let's go back out of this pass. Okay, that looks good. Let's go see if this resets itself. Let's go to B. Okay, looking good. We've got different environment, different HDRs, that kitchen HDR. I've got different cool lighting. I've got different materials. I've got different outputs active. Let's go to A, see if that torus has fixed itself. It has not. Let's take a looky here at the torus and see if we can debug this, if this is something I did or this. So torus, there's the material. Let me just hit escape to deselect all these guys. That's on. Should be warm gray. Not sure why it's not showing. Let's turn this off and back on. There it is. So it's just a preview bug. That's fine, so we can apply. That doesn't really matter. But so anyway, preview bugs can also throw you off. Preview not updating. So but right now we're looking pretty good. So I've got turn off auto add just so I can play it safe now. Let's go over here to none. So there's my base scene. All those special outputs are off, and I've got all my material and lighting options are off. And you can break this down as many as you want. You could have multiple passes for different lighting options in the same material, so I can have warm and cool lighting with just option A and warm and cool lighting with just option B. For this demo, I just have warm lighting with A and cool lighting with B. And let's say I need some special outputs for compositing. So let's go over here. Let's do another pass. Let's call this new. We'll call this special A. All right. So I'll go like, okay. So I've got a new pass here called special A. I'm going to go to my base scene, get out of there, make sure we're in our base scene because we add everything in the base scene and keep it off. And then we go to our pass and we turn it back on. That's the workflow, right? So the great thing about passes, though, is we can do some very specific outputs. So like in RenderMan and some other programs, they call them AOVs, right? Arbitrary output variables. So let's do some arbitrary passes, basically output variables, right? So let's do something interesting, like just a gradient on the instance value on this torus here. No, let's do the cone, actually, because maybe I want to use this as a mat in compositing. So again, I set up everything in the base scene. I'm in the base scene here, no passes, no passes, no pass active, no eyeball there. And I'm going to do a quick setup. So I'm going to add, let's just do a group here. We'll put this down here. So we set up our base scene, how we want it to look, and then we're going to turn things on and off in our pass, right? So let's call this special A. Okay. And inside this, I'm going to add a material, and I'm also going to add a shader. Okay, so I have a material and a shader here. A material, I'm going to make it all black, so all black, 100%. Zero diffuse, zero spec. In fact, let's just make sure this is all black by going over here to luminosity and saying 1 and making it 100% black. Now, right now I still have alpha channels active though, so I don't want those either. So let's go back to shading. And in special A, I've got a shader, and I'm going to call this alpha opacity. I'm going to say constant, I'm going to say 0. And remember, in MODO, right now, bottom up, this base shader is overriding this shader values. If I look at the alpha channel, it's still there, right? Because this base shader has alpha channel set to opacity. I need to pull this guy above the base shader. And this isn't matted, so this is covering up the entire scene. Right now, the entire scene is 100% black, and there is no alpha output on anything because I turned off alpha to 100. I turned off the alpha, right? Turned it to 100% 0. All right, so that's great. So I'm isolating the entire scene. I'm going to isolate that cone by making everything gone. Let's do special A. Let's give this a color like purple. Purple. And I'm going to make another group, right? So go over here, make another group. And put this up here in special A, above special A. And this group I'm actually, let me make sure that's not in base scene here. So that's in special A, and, or not as above special A, but I'm going to call this also special A. It's okay, it'll add a little 2 there. I'm just making sure I know it's in the same pass as that guy. These are related. Call it purple. And in here, I'm going to add a material, and I'm going to add a shader. I'm going to add a constant gradient, not a constant, a gradient. Under processing, gradient. Okay. So gradient, I'm going to put on the luminous color channel. Material, I'm going to do a similar thing here. I'm going to turn this to 0. Whoops, let's turn that to 0. We can turn that on, turn that to 0. And let's go over here to luminosity and say 1. All right. And again, this is on the entire scene, so I need to isolate my cone material here. So now that's just on the cone, so it's all white. But my gradient on instance angle, I'm going to keep that there, and we'll just edit that. And let's say towards the edge, we want white, 100% 1, and at 0, we want black. Not red, we want white. Why is that not? Oh, I just grabbed the red one. 0. Red. Why is that? That is weird. Oh, that's why. This guy needs to be 100 on all of these. That was kind of weird how it did that. Right, value 1. Okay, we got white on the edge and black in the middle. And great, and that is isolated right here with its own alpha. So that's what I want. Now, if I didn't have render passes, I'd have to make an entire new scene and render this out as a separate scene because it's covering up all of my great materials here. But because we have render passes, we can just pop these guys in all these channel values here in an alternate scene. So I need one more. I need some outputs. So I've got my shading done here. Let's do an output. So let's go up here to the outputs. So let's add a render output. We'll just say render output. Outputs. Where's outputs? Where's outputs? Give me an output. Add outputs. Render outputs. Sorry, I'm like losing it here. So I want final color. And we'll just do an alpha with that as well. Outputs. Alpha. And again, remember, I'm going to change these names. Call that special A. Output. Special A. I'm going to, you guessed it, I'm going to group those. I'm going to call that special A. And I'm going to make this purple. And must have, turn that off there. So there we've got that, right? And there's an email from my wife, very interesting. So in the base scene, I'm going to turn all these guys off, right? Off and off. So we're back to our base scene. That's great. We have a base scene. And we have an output. Let's make a new one called Special A. There it is, already typed in. Special A. So there's our output, Special A. We're in Special A. Special A, eyeball. And I'm going to have auto add on. And I'm going to turn these guys on. Boom, boom, turn on my outputs, okay? Lighting doesn't matter, I can keep that because I just have, everything's black and this is just luminous, so lighting and reflections don't matter, I don't have to mess with those. And there's my output A. So let's apply those guys, those channels are added down here, special A channels. And so let's take a look. Let's go back to my base scene. There it is. I've got material A options. Again, that's a bug I keep bumping into where the preview isn't updating properly. So this is the torus. It's really annoying. Turn that on and off. And I've got material B options right there. And I've got special A options right there. So there's an output. And I can make as many of these as I want. So here I have, a nice, output where I can bring that into After Effects or Nuke or whatever and use it as a matte to adjust the color or whatever of the cone in post. And again, I'm just layering these things up in my base scene and then turning them on and off in the different passes. And I really think that's the best way to do it because the only channels I have in my pass group are enable channels. And that's a pretty easy thing to keep track of. So what if I want to add a couple of different cameras to this scene, and so I can have different camera angles per pass? I can do that. Again, we need to set everything up in the base scene. So I'm going to turn auto add off just to be careful here. I'm in the base scene, right? No passes going on here. And I'm going to add a camera. And we'll call this camera A. And I'm going to add another one. We'll call that camera B. And there we go. And let's just, I'm going to move this down. Let's take a peeky here through camera A. And let's make a somewhat decent angle for that. Like this. Okay. Boom. We're making these changes in our base scene, right? Not our pass. And we'll do camera B. We'll kind of do opposite and go from this direction. There's camera B. Okay, so we've got camera A. There's regular camera. And I've got camera A, different angle, and camera B. All right, kind of looks the same, but it's the other side. So let's go back to regular camera, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to make this red. I'm going to right click and make this blue, because it's good to organize your scene. You can even, if it helps, you can even turn these visibilities off, just so you know they're not, if that helps to remind you that these aren't the proper cameras for this particular scene here. You can do that. But what I want to do is go over here to my material A options. So now I'm at a pass. So there's my pass, all of my lighting and materials in that pass. But I want to use a different camera. So I have to be careful. Again, you have to be very systematic in render passes. So I want to change my camera. So I'm going to select the render item here. And I have to make sure auto add is on. So I have to add these channels. In MODO 801, the render camera is a channel. But I'm not adding this manually. I need to make sure auto add is on, or I can add it manually, but we're doing this with auto add, even though I've completely warned you against using auto add earlier. With this sort of methodology, this very strict methodology, auto add is useful. So I have that on. I've got my camera selected, and I'm going to change some visibilities here. Put camera A visible. Not that that does anything, but it just reminds me that this is the render camera for this pass, and I'm going to change that to camera A. I'm going to apply everything. If I look at my base scene, go back to my base scene, that changes back to camera, and that visibility is on. So let's do this again for camera B, B options. We're going to change the render camera to camera B, and we're going to turn camera B on over here, and then hit apply. Now I'm going to turn off auto add, so I don't want to screw my scenes up, so I turn that off. And let's go over here to the base scene. And we've got base scene is rendering out of camera, A is rendering out of camera A, and B is running out of camera B. And I never changed anything for special, so it's going to render out of the first camera as well. So that's changing cameras. So there's a lot to be done here. So really what's nice is just changing outputs. Here we have a camera index channel, which is going to be changing. That's the channel we use to change cameras per pass. So, but for the most part, we just have enable buttons on and some visibility, I guess, in our cameras there for this whole setup. And I'm able to get multiple different environments, multiple light settings, multiple material settings, multiple outputs, and even a different camera per pass by just using enable channels and a camera index and some visibility if you want to. So that's a pretty good workflow in my opinion. You can utilize auto add carefully with this workflow, or you can of course add all these enable channels manually if you're really afraid of screwing your scene up. But you just have to always watch out what pass you're in, and what if auto add is on or not, and if the channels you're changing are in the pass group. So those are things you have to watch out for. You have to make sure your changes are applied as well. So that's it for passes, really. Let's take a look at our pass rendering options real quick before I wrap this up completely. All right, before I jump off to rendering, I'm going to do another sort of special case pass here and utilize what we already have set up over here, just because I think this is something you'll be doing a lot of with render passes. So let's get out of this pass, go back to the base scene. Remember, we set everything up in the base scene, and then we just turn it on or off depending on what pass we're in. So I'm in the base scene, so we'll sort of preview this. I'm going to utilize this special A pass here that turns everything off and turns off the alphas. And because I'm going to do that, why don't I just sort of say special A/B for that, just to remind me. And I'm going to create a group called special B. Not all caps though. Special B, and we'll make this, how about yellow? I'm actually going to duplicate this group because I want to put render outputs in there. I also want to do some material stuff, so let's drag this down here. Up here in special B, let's add a couple render outputs. Basic, we'll do a final color, and we'll do, of course, alpha. Boom, and we can of course rename these if you want to. Special B, and oops, don't double click it. Special B. Okay, we have outputs. We don't need these on, of course, in the base scene, so I'm going to turn those off. And over here, I'm going to add a material, and I'm going to add a shader. I'm going to add a processing node, not a node, a layer, although you could do nodal shading too. You could do nodal shading hooked up to a constant or something like in some of my other videos and just turn that on or off. Okay, so we've got I don't want a process, I want a gradient. Processing, gradient. All right, so let's mask this guy. This right now is going to the whole scene, so let's mask this to, let's say, the plane. So right now that's just on the plane. And let's turn on the special AB thing here is all black with no alpha there for these guys. So right now we just have a plane and let's look at the alpha and an alpha for the plane. That's what's going on right now. And for our gradient, maybe, so remember our material, we don't want diffuse color, we want luminosity, we want this like full values. We don't want our lighting to determine these values, we want just full values on here. So turn off diffuse and spec, and we just want luminosity. And this gradient is going to be affecting luminosity just like our cone down here. So right click, luminous color. And let's do a gradient on, again, this could be for anything. We're just making a matte. So we'll say we're making a fall-off matte based on, let's do a distance from locator. Let's find that. So let's do surface shading. Nope, I think that's going to be in sample parameters. Distance to locator. The locator is just going to be the texture locator of this group right here. And so let's edit this gradient. And so when it's we're editing the color of luminosity color. So when it's close, we want that, and we get a meter away instead of white. We want black. And so I'm just going to use this for a matte and compositing later on, because maybe I want to highlight this or make it purple or something. I'm just making a matte. That's all I'm doing. That's the way you do with render passes. You're just making mattes. So that looks good. That's what I want. But we're in our base pass here. So it's a base scene. So let's turn this guy off, right? Turn that off, and let's turn off our special AB one. Turn that off. So let me just go up here to shading. So there we are. Don't need current layer overlay on. So this is our base scene, and let's create a new pass, right? We need to add a pass here. Actually, just get in the habit of doing it up here. Let's do this. So let's do a new pass. We'll call it special B. Okay, and now this pass is active. Got this pass active, right? If I turn on auto add, I can start altering the scene for this pass. So I'm going to turn on my special B there, and I'm going to turn on my special AB to block out everything else. And let's turn off our base scene passes. Don't need those on passes outputs. I actually want this above special A because B is above, so we should keep that in mind. And let's turn on our outputs. So we go ahead and turn this back to shading. So now we're going to be outputting this in our B pass. Special B pass. So great. So now how do we render all this stuff? Okay, so now we're going to render these guys. And what I've done is I've gone through, and each one of these outputs I have set a folder. Here in my past tutorial, I've set some folders and some output names for each one of these, or some file names for each one of these render outputs. So every single one of these, here it's saving the alpha with the color. We've got different ones. I don't want to expand this out, but each one of these points goes to a different folder, right? Like this depth one here is going to go to a depth folder, material A options depth. That's the name of it. So I like naming everything myself, and I like pointing it to my own folder. That's why I have all these render outputs here that go on and off with each pass. Over here in the render item, and make sure let's go to the base scene. So we're at none, okay? And our render output pattern, I'm going to just change that to just frame. So, because I don't really want MODO's system here. I just want my system, which is I named each one of these guys very specifically and have it going to a very specific folder because that's my system. So I'm going to go over here to the output pattern and we'll say I just want frame. So I just went to this output with, seriously, does anybody use stereo anymore? That's going to go away in a couple of years. So I just want the frames, right? And resolution is fine. Interesting thing is, resolution, these are channel values. So you could, in theory, do one pass at low res, say 320 by 240 with some really crappy settings, and one pass at high res at 1080, 1920 by 1080 with really great like GI settings, and just render out one pass to get a view of it, but know that that entire scene there has a separate pass with all the high res settings in it, almost like editing with proxies. So that's another interesting thing you can do with passes in MODO. That's pretty cool. But right now I just changed, I'm in the scene here, and I'm just changing the output pattern, and frame I'm just doing 1:1 because I don't want to render out a whole animation here. So let's go up to render and say render F9. And that is going to just render out, it's not going to render out all my passes. If I look at my passes here, it just does the default pass or the base scene. So I don't get my passes there. I'm not going to do F10, render current view. I'm going to look at render passes. So if I do render passes, just one note, render all, that seems great. Will that render all my passes plus my base scene? No, that's not what render all does. All render all does is it'll render everything in the scene even if its visibility is set to 0. So let's just ignore render all. Not really that useful in my opinion. But let's go look at render passes. That's going to be like an F9, but you can choose a pass group. So I can hit this, and it's going to go through, and now it's starting to render my passes, right? So there's pass A. And the interesting thing here is I think this is a bug, because it looks like it's rendering out of this camera when it should be rendering out of the pass camera, right? And so this is not correct. So this is another gotcha. If I hit render passes and I'm in the base scene here, or let me just abort this. Yes. Okay. So if I'm in the base scene, and here preview's not updated because I'm in the base scene, so let's get this updated here. Let's go to A. See, that camera angle is different. And I go to the base scene, there's that camera angle. But if I'm in the base scene and I hit render passes and I pick my pass group, okay, let me just cancel this real quick. Remember, now, our first pass, material A options, has this sort of up, looking down camera angle. So let's go back to none. I think, okay, I'm going to render my passes. So I go to base scene, I say render passes, and I pick my pass group, and I hit OK. And right off the bat, this time it's rendering it from the correct angle, which is interesting, because last time it didn't. So there's some sort of weird bug in there. I'm not sure what that is or what I just did to fix it, but if anybody could track that down and file it, that'd be great. Maybe if I watch this video, I'll see what I did wrong. Or probably, I don't think I actually did anything wrong. I think there's a bug in there. But so that's rendering the right camera angle, and now the camera angle for pass B is going to be slightly different. And so now it's rendering the correct pass B, and you can see it's doing option B here. I'll just let this go, even though this could be faster. Sorry, I'm wasting your time. I should tell a funny story now. Once upon a time, there was a Bigfoot named Ed, and he lived in Northern California. And I'm not going to have to make up the rest of the story because these other two passes are going to render super fast. So correct camera angle, correct camera angle. Okay, the reason I let that render, I should just edit that out, but I'm not going to because I'm lazy. So we can look at our passes here, right? A, B, A, and I can also look at my outputs. I've had a depth in this one. So there's my Taurus alpha, right? I made that. And I think I had a depth in here. Did I have a depth? Depth, but I didn't change the range, so it's all white. But remember, I have all these outputs here. So that's just putting outputs in there. And remember, a lot of people, when they composite, they may have 30 outputs. I'm not one of those people who likes to composite or who likes to render everything on a separate output and then piece it back together in a compositing program so I can change the lighting, because honestly at this stage in the game in 2014 it's faster just to change the lighting in the 3D program. Maybe, I guess, if you have a director sitting over your desk or something and you're in more of a high-end situation, you want to do that. In my opinion, we have real-time rendering in preview, so let's just do that instead of having to go to a compositing program. But anyway, so you've got all your outputs here. And that's great. So if you do render passes, there seems to be some sort of bug where you got to make sure the camera angle is correct, but that's what that does. But really what we want to do is, and remember, when I did render passes here, let's open up our render window. So open render window. It didn't do the base scene, right? It just did the passes. So I didn't get this base scene. So that's going to have to be separate, and that's just something we have to live with, because I can also go up here. The main one I want to do here is render animation. And what that is going to let me do is, look at my email, it's going to let me render the animation, and first frame, last frame, great, image sequence, great, and the pass group, color and lighting options. I'm going to hit OK, and it's going to say use the file names in the render outputs. That's exactly what I want to do, because I put all my file names in the render outputs here, and I want to say yes. So let's get these going. Camera angle is correct. I'm going to edit this out, so we'll just let this render here. Or I could go back to my Bigfoot story, which I don't really have because I was just making it up. But anyway, so this is rendering out. I'll edit this out. Okay, so it just finished. I rendered all my passes, and now when it finished rendering, it did not put me back in the base pass. So I still have auto add on. That's dangerous. Let me turn that off. My base, it left me in the pass that I finished rendering at. So I have to always be careful and go back to my base pass. Let's say I didn't, and I'm still in pass B here. Now remember, when I rendered this pass group out, it did not render my base, right? It did not render my base scene. It just rendered the pass group when I hit the render animation there. So if I'm in this pass group, pass B still, and I say, hey, I want to render, my base scene, so I'm going to say render animation, and I'm going to say frame 1. I'm not going to pick a pass group, but here I forgot to go back to my base scene. If I hit OK, and I say, yes, I want render outputs, and I'm going to overwrite a file because I just rendered it, and I hit yes, it's rendering that current pass, even though I didn't pick a pass group. So in my opinion, that's a bug. It should be rendering the base scene. Just make sure you go over here to none, and we're back in the base scene, and I want to go to render animation, don't pick a pass group, hit OK, I want to use the outputs. Now it's rendering my base scene. So if I've got now I have all of my images, right? So I go over here to say After Effects, and let me just import everything. I made this nice folder sequence here. These are all my names and my folders the way I want them. That's how I had to set it up. Let me open all these guys in here. Now I've got everything in a composition. I'm like, hey, great, I got everything in here. So let's just turn off a couple of stuff. Let's look at my. I should move this over so I can read my thingies here. Let's look at my base scene. Great, and let's look at my special A, which is that cone there. So this is what's nice about passes is I can use that for a matte, right? So I can use this for a luma matte on my cone here, and so this guy is just being luma matted, and I can go in and say effect, color correction, and adjust hue or something like that, hue saturation, and change this, and then hey, look at that. So that's kind of a cool thing about passes, right? I can get all these sort of special case passes in here and do this stuff in compositing. Pretty cool, right? So I can even grab another one and use my special B pass here and mat that on Luma. And I'm now isolating my floor, right? My little floor thingy there, and I can again do go effect and hue saturation, color correction, hue saturation. There's a nice effect just to show how this is working, and there I'm giving a purpley bleed to my floor, right? Great. Okay, so maybe not so much. So we're doing some cool stuff in passes, and I've got all this stuff as well if I want to show these or make different comps. So passes are working great, but let's say I made a mistake, and not in this, but let's say this one I'm like, oh man, I don't really want that to be white. I actually want that to be green. So let's go back to MODO. And how do we do this efficiently? How do we make a change to a pass and just re-render out that pass in an efficient manner? Let's go to, now make sure I'm in my base pass here, right? Because remember, we make all changes in the base pass. I don't want to go over here to Material Options A and change this to green or whatever I wanted. Let's say green. I want to do this in the base pass. I don't want to add these channels because the only channels I want over here are enable channels. So let's go over to the base pass, all right? Let's go to the base. Go back to none. We're in the base. We're looking through the base camera. That's fine. And I'm just going to test out this Material Options A on the torus, right? And that's this metallic warm gray. So let's say I don't want that to be, let's say I want the diffuse color instead of being, that's the reflection, or it's kind of weird. Picking that for diffuse color. Is that add? Oh, it's an additive. I even made this. I should know what this is about. Okay, let's make this green. And say that's what I want, okay? So that's great. So that channel change, that green, remember, that's going to be pushed back up from setup. It's going to be pushed back up to my, not my thigh or drumstick, it's going to be pushed back up to my Material Options A pass. So if I go over here to Material Options A, we've got it green because that's just floating up there and it's enabled, right? That is enabled in this pass. So I want to go back to my base pass. I don't want this enabled in my base pass, so let's turn it off. Okay, so we're back to the purple. But in Material Options A, I've got the green. So let's say I want to re-render that pass, right? Well, I've got my pass groups over here. You'll notice there's a camera icon there. That means that's renderable. I don't want to render everything because that takes forever. It doesn't really take forever because I just have one frame here, but it could conceivably take forever. So let's turn those off, go up here to render, and say render animation, one-to-one image sequence. Let's just pick that pass there, color and lighting options, that pass group, but only one pass in this pass group has the little render camera there. So I hit OK, and I want to overwrite that file, and it's going to say that to everything, but it should just be rendering this one pass here. And I'm going to wait it out and make you watch because now I'll cut this out. Fine. Okay, so that finished rendering. Let's go back to After Effects. Take a look. There it's updated automatically even. Good job, After Effects. It just rendered that one render active pass. So I'd have to re-render everything. So that's nice. So yeah, that is render passes. I'm not sure I need to say anything else about it. Do I need to say anything else about this? I think we went over how it works. We went over gotchas. We went over automatically adding channels and how dangerous that can be, but also how quick and efficient it is if you're being methodical about everything. Went over changing cameras, changing materials. I didn't go over changing animations, but again, maybe that's a different tutorial. But again, you wouldn't want to add a bunch of transform channels and rotation channels and everything like that to your pass group. What you want to do is use MODO's actions. So you would, and I haven't tested this, but I'm guessing in theory this will work. So you have different animations based in actions, which are similar to passes in a way, where it's just an alternate set of, an alternate source of channel values. And in a different pass, you can just enable or disable actions. So you're just dealing, again, with enabling and disabling one channel instead of adding dozens and dozens of channels to a render pass, or let's not call it a render pass because it's not just render items, but to a different pass. So I think that will cover it. Only 10 hours long, a new record.